Welcome back to this week's episode of Hormones, Metabolism, and You. I'm your host, Dr. Cassie Smith. I'm a board certified endocrinologist and a functional medicine gut specialist now based out of Oklahoma City. If you are ever having any issues with bleeding, painful menstrual cycles, PCOS, endometriosis, just hormone questions in general. Should my periods be heavy? Should they hurt? Should I be moody prior to my period? What's causing these things? I have all your answers today. So I asked one of my now very dear friends, Dr. Shawn Tassone. He is on Instagram. He's a OBGYN, is functional GYN doctor based out of Austin. I asked him to come on today so we could just chat all things hormones. I wanted to ask him kind of as we transition through our life with hormones, just some questions you guys asked me. And so we talked about PCOS, we talked about PMS. Is it normal to have these terrible symptoms before we have our period? Is it normal to feel like we're dying? Is there something that we should do if we're having these symptoms? We talked about bleeding. Is it normal if we have irregular bleeding? What should we do about it? After we go through menopause, we talked about bleeding there. And the other thing we talked about were hormones. Like, are hormones really safe? We still have this stigma out there with hormones. There's a lot of doctors saying that they cause cancer. And so we broke that down for you. So we just did a really good deep dive into hormones, but we also got to learn a little bit about Dr. Tassone and like why he went into gynecology and what it's like to be a male as a gynecologist. And I thought he had a really good story and a really good perspective. Dr. Shawn Tassone, known as America's Holistic Gynecologist, is the first physician in the United States to be double board certified in obstetrics and gynecology and by the American Board of Integrative Medicine. He holds a medical degree in addition to a PhD in mind-body medicine, and he told us that story as to how that happened. He's practicing OBGYN in Austin, Texas, a hormone specialist, an author, a speaker, highly rated patient advocate, and a creator of the world's first integrative hormone mapping system. In his 20 plus years of practice, he's seen over 40,000 women, and he's determined to remove the myths around women's health. As an integrative health practitioner, he believes that you should have an active role in your care, which is exactly why I asked him to come on today. So I hope that you guys enjoy this episode. So today I have the privilege of interviewing Dr. Shawn Tassone. He and I met through our friend McCall McPherson. You guys know McCall. She's been on the podcast. We both actually work with her now at Modern Thyroid Clinic. He is a gynecologist who kind of believes like I do, right? So he's more of a normal gynecologist, I guess we should say, or maybe not normal, but just more functional medicine approach based. And so I brought him on today because I want to talk to him about several things that you guys ask a lot of questions about. We're going to talk about some PCOS questions you guys have, some perimenopause, painful menstrual cycles, maybe a little bit of bleeding after menopause. So lots of good stuff. So thank you for coming on and chatting with me.
Oh, well, us pariahs, we have to stick together.
Yes, we do. So will you kind of tell everyone briefly? So to my Oklahoma people, he did his fellowship or residency here at OU, and he actually was just telling me he lived in Chickasha and in Edmond. So he's an Oklahoman. But tell everyone kind of how you ended up doing what you're doing. Because, kind of like you asked me on your podcast, most of us end up in this space for one reason or another. And it's usually interesting to know why.
So what's fascinating is when I asked you that question, when I did my residency, we have to choose in our fourth year, I did OB because I was going to do medicine because I liked the diagnostic aspect, but I quickly realized I hated rounding all day. And so I did a fourth year elective in ultrasound and just noticed that the residents were really happy. It was a good group of people. And I thought, well, you can do surgery. There is medicine because we dealt with diabetes and pregnancy and thyroid and all this stuff. And then there was surgery. And I don't think, that was a very superficial, I was my late 20s, but it was a rather superficial thing. But then what happened to me in my second year of residency, my mom was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And through that process, the 5 years that she lived after that diagnosis, what I found was that, they wouldn't put her on hormones and they wouldn't do any of this stuff. And I knew a lot about ovarian cancer because I was a resident. But what I found was that I couldn't help my own mother live a happy, productive life. She was miserable. And And when she died, I thought to myself, I kind of felt somewhat worthless. And as an only child, I didn't have anybody to talk to. So I kind of went on this journey, if you will. Naturally, I was living in Tucson at the time. I went to Sedona because that's where you go when you have a spiritual crisis. And I was reading a book at the time. I think it was 2001. I was reading a book by Andrew Weil called 8 Weeks to Optimum Health. And at the time, he was talking about crazy stuff like CoQ10 and fish oil and blah, blah, blah. And I decided because he had a fellowship program at the University of Arizona. So I thought, okay, I'll do that because I needed to do something. I had to figure this out. There had to be more, if you will. And so I did the 2-year fellowship at the University of Arizona. And then there was this section that we did on spirituality and health. I mean, I grew up Catholic, but I barely went to church and I didn't really think of spirituality very much. But I decided I needed to learn more. So I just did a PhD program, which to this day I don't quite understand why I did it, but in philosophy. And in that 6 years, I traveled to Brazil, Peru, Mexico, um, and I basically studied with shamans in those areas and just learned that there was so much more to healing than what we think in modern medicine. We think we have all the answers, and we do have a lot of answers, and we can do a lot of cool things, but we have kind of forgotten a lot of the things that the body can do. And so now in my practice, because of my mom passing away and pushing me into that kind of spiritual, death, if you will. I think I've just come out the other side and have really found myself now in the last probably 7 years of just doing gynecology and really helping women just feel better, which I couldn't do for my own mom.
That's a really cool story. I'm glad that you shared that with us because a lot of people will say, and I kind of wanted to ask you, like, especially when you kind of went into gynecology, it's, men going into gynecology, it's like, well, why would you do that? And it's a good answer, right? But it was kind of the joke whenever we were in residency. I don't know about you. It's like guys were like, oh, I don't want to go listen to women complain about their hormones all day. But you actually enjoy that, which is a good thing.
Well, when I was a resident, it was half and half. There were 10 men, 10 women. Now, you probably couldn't find a man if you tried in a gynecology program. And I think that now it's a legitimate question for sure. But I think at the time I didn't know. Maybe it was destiny or whatever you want to call it, listening to some sort of inner voice or whatever. But I now feel like finally, I've probably delivered 5,000 babies, but now I feel like I'm finally living what I was supposed to do.
Which is amazing. And actually, what's very interesting, I personally know 3 male gynecologists that are very phenomenal people. One of them is thankfully my own gynecologist, but I know 3 male gynecologists that are just phenomenal doctors. And I unfortunately don't know a lot of women. So, for whatever that's worth.
I don't know a lot of men, so we're even.
Yeah. So whatever, for whatever's that's worth. But yeah, but I know some really, really, I don't know if you know Dr. Johnny Pete. He's out of Woodland, Texas. I really like Johnny. And there's a Dr. Wesley Vaughn here in Oklahoma City. He actually was in fellowship whenever I was in fellowship. So he's a younger male gynecologist, just super sweet guy. So anyways, just, it's interesting. And I kind of joke, but sometimes I wonder if like, I've been to female gynecologists and sometimes I feel like they're kind of like, suck it up. You have period pain, whatever, because they've had it too. But whenever I talk to my gynecologist about it, he's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. That's terrible.
Yeah,
It's
I
like,
don't know.
he
It
doesn't
sounds horrible.
know.
That's what I say. Like, oh, that sounds awful. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe, I don't know, maybe that's some of it. But so you've delivered babies, you've been a shaman, you've studied with shamans. That's pretty cool. That's what I want to do in my next life. So you do a very like functional medicine based holistic gynecology practice and you're in Tucson, right? Did I make that
I'm
up?
in Austin now.
Austin. Oh, now you're in Austin.
Moved into
Okay.
Austin in 2013.
So everyone lives in Austin, including McCall. Maybe I need to move there. Okay.
Yeah,
So
everybody's here.
everyone's in Austin. Okay. So I think I want to start our hormone journey talk with PCOS, because this is like the big thing people are talking about now, right? Like, it affects a lot of women. A lot of women are undiagnosed. It takes a long time to diagnose them. I see a ton of women who in their 30s or 40s, I'm like, you have PCOS. They were never told that. So just give us like a brief synopsis. Do you feel like PCOS is as prevalent as we say it is? Is it more prevalent than it used to be? Why, etc.?
I think a lot of women are diagnosed with PCOS that don't have it. And I think a lot of women aren't diagnosed with PCOS that have it. And the reason for that is because it's a syndrome, there isn't a strict criteria. There's the Rotterdam, but I think that's horribly inadequate. It used to be like we would look for no period, weight gain, abnormal hair growth, and then on an ultrasound, we would look for that string of pearls around the edges of the ovaries. But we never talked about insulin resistance 20 years ago. We just thought it was part of the syndrome, but we didn't really ever dive into it. And the, you know, horribly to say this, but we would just put women on birth control pills. And it's still done today, unfortunately. But I think I see a lot of younger women that have it because those are the people that come to me, usually a daughter of a patient of mine or something. And they're diagnosed with it, but they're not really given any options, first of all. And then second, I see a lot of women that have been having issues for a long time. Like you'll see I always ask them, if you look at your pictures throughout high school and college and whatnot, did you have a period of your life where you gained like 30 or 40 pounds in a year or two? And inevitably, yeah. And it's like, and nobody's ever asked me, I eat right. And I think when women say they eat right, they exercise all the time and they keep gaining weight, that the medical system just says, yeah, sure. Right. Yeah. Of course, everybody says that. And they're minimized as more than usual. And so I think the lack of diagnostic criteria, the desire, I always try to defend my colleagues because I think when you see 50 patients a day and the high ticket item in OBGYN is OB, that's where you make all your money. And they're a 5-minute appointment for the most part. To sit down with somebody for 30 minutes and talk about PCOS, it's just not going to happen because they don't have the time. And they'll run some labs and then it's just like, yep, you got it. Let's put you on a birth control pill. So unfortunately, it's just not getting treated. And I think sometimes they don't even want to look at the labs because they don't want to know. The doctors just, they know it's going to be a pain in the butt. So they won't even draw the labs. They'll just say, oh, you probably have PCOS. Let's put you on a birth control pill.
Do you think that birth control is the best treatment for PCOS?
Well, I'm sure you would agree, it covers it up. It doesn't fix it. I mean, it can fix the high testosterone because you're shutting down the ovaries. It might maybe help with insulin resistance in some patients, but the reality is, once you come off the birth control pill, you still have PCOS. And so, I've even seen women in menopause that still, even though the ovaries aren't working per se, still have the insulin resistant part of PCOS. So we always used to tell women too, well, okay, now you're in menopause, you don't have PCOS anymore. But I don't think it necessarily, I kind of talk about PCOS now as a chronic disease process. Like it may never go away, but we can definitely, if we can get you maybe under a certain weight, I think there's just, I call it a switch. It's like there's this switch that flips for some women at a certain weight. And then all of a sudden they just pack on like 30 or 40 pounds in 6 to 12 months. And if we can get you down under that weight, and I'm sure there's some genetic component to that too, because if you look at the family picture, you tend to see similarities. But I think to make it's a long answer to say, I don't think birth control pills treat it. I think they just cover it up and they can help with some of the symptoms, but it's a band-aid.
I completely agree. I think most viral TikTok video I ever did has over 2.3 million views, was the answer to PCOS, or the treatment for PCOS is not birth control. And I explained why. And I just think that I said exactly what you said. Your OBGYN has 5 minutes to talk to you, and they don't know how to interpret your labs or what to do with them. But they do know how to write a script for birth control, and it shuts you up. It makes you feel better. But when you stop that birth control 5, 10, 15 years later, your cortisol is still high, your insulin's still high, and you still have PCOS. So that's where I think that we missed the boat. We have these young girls that we never talk to. And then unfortunately, they come to you or I when they're 35 and they want to have a baby, and nobody's talked to them about their PCOS and haven't gotten them ready for that, then that can take a couple years. Well, then they're 37, 38, and then we're in trouble because their egg quality is generally worse than somebody who's healthy, right?
I call the birth control pill the get out of my office prescription, because it's not only used for PCOS, it's used for abnormal bleeding, weight gain, headaches, acne. I mean, you name it. And it's like they just, like you said, it's like, well, I'm going to do something for you. Now you can go, but and you got to give it at least 3 months. So then they don't have to deal with you. And I think if they do that long enough, you just end up leaving and trying to find somebody else.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. So, transitioning from PCOS, what about like PMS? So PMS is another thing. I hear lots of things on the internet. One of the things that you hear though from some people is like, your period shouldn't be the most painful thing in the world. You shouldn't have any pain at all. You should just bleed, and they should be very regular and perfect. What is the truth about that? Like, should we have pain? Should we have mood swings? Like, should we have these fluctuations in our hormones, or should we just be very like flat people all the time?
I think that, again, as a man, I wouldn't want something that hurts every month. I think if you have, if you have some cramping for part of a day, that's probably normal. But if I always say, if the pain is interfering with the way you live your life, or if you have to plan your life around your period, if you dread your period, if you're missing school, if you're missing work, well, that's not normal. And, you know, I don't want to say some pain is normal because I think pain is always a sign that there's something going on. But, like, if you have a headache, maybe you didn't sleep the night before, it's not that, it doesn't mean that there's something horribly wrong with you, but it means that you probably have something going on. And I think the same thing usually. I see young girls all the time, probably 14 to 22, give or take, that will come to me for really bad periods. And it's usually prostaglandin issues, that are causing them to basically feel like they're in labor every month, heavy, heavy bleeding. That's obviously abnormal. But again, I think a lot of women are meant to, ever since Eve bit the apple, women have been taught that pain is normal. And you're still kind of being punished for the original sin, if you will. That, you should suffer a little bit. And it's the same thing. It's not just with periods, it's with menopause. It's a little suffering is okay. I asked my grandmother once, I think she was 85. I said, what was menopause like for you? And she said she was this 4'11" Italian woman, who would beat your ass, kind of and she said, what the hell is menopause? And I'm like, when you had the hot flashes, she's like, Shawn, listen, I was a World War II mom. And your grandfather went off to war. I had to go work, and basically I made bullets for 4 years. And we didn't talk about stuff like that. One, because people wouldn't listen to us. But two, we just didn't have time for shit like that. Not that it's a bad thing to talk about pain, but this is a phenomenon that we're seeing now because women have a voice, more at least than they did before. And so I think that, the more that we talk about it, the less we're taking that stigma off of it. And I see women all the time, as I'm sure you do, that feel like a completely different person just from hormone replacement that they didn't know was possible. They just thought they had to suffer. And we make fun of them all the time, like sitcoms. It's like, I remember when my mom had her hysterectomy, she was probably 30 something. And one day, I think I was 16 or something, she was yelling at me because naturally it was her fault, not mine, because I was perfect. And I said to her, I made the mistake of saying to her, did you take your pill today? Which was her Premarin probably. And I even knew that at 16. So I had learned that from somewhere, right? It had to have been TV or whatever, that all women's problems come from their uterus and their hormones. And I think that's still real today.
I want to know what your mom said when you said, "Did you take your?"
I don't even remember because I probably blocked it out. But yeah, it was, Like I said in our podcast, things you should never say to a woman, that would be one of them,
That would be one of them. Did you take your pill today? Okay.
especially your mom.
Yeah, and I think a lot of women just have a lot of PMS symptoms. You know, there's a lot of people with endometriosis, whether it's diagnosed or not. There's a lot of people with, gut issues. We talked a lot about that on your podcast. So if you're already bloated and you already have a little bit of like SIBO or constipation, and then your uterus starts cramping. I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong, you're the surgeon here, but I think from anatomy, your bowel is very close to your uterus. So if you have a bowel that is full of stool and you're bloated and gassy and your uterus is cramping, that just seems like a pretty big disaster for me in a small space, right? So, I mean, I think there's just a lot of things that can go on. But then the other thing that women really struggle with is their mood, right? Whenever their hormones are fluctuating or as they go through menopause. So, let's talk about that a little bit. Like, some women will say to me, there's a certain week of the month or there's a certain time of the month where my mood is terrible. I feel like everything, I'm going to die, yada, yada, yada. It's typically right before they start their period, right? But they feel like they're going to die, doomsday, and then they start their period and everything is fine. Is that normal, or is that something people should be concerned about?
Well, again, even on Instagram, there's reels that women will do, like they'll show like me on my period and they're happy, and then the week before their period they're miserable, and they joke about it. But the reason that it's joked about is because it's true. It happens to a lot of women. I don't think that, again, if I, as a man, I don't deal with that. And I would think, looking at that, when women talk to me about it, I wouldn't want to live like that. I can't stand if my back hurts for like 2 hours, let alone having to suffer for 7 to 10 days every single month. I mean, I can't even imagine that. So, but again, we minimize it and we make it seem normal. And women also feel like, especially now that, women are working as much as guys do, if not more, and they don't feel like they can talk about it because they're in a practice with men, and they don't want to lose time at work. They don't want to be the butt of a joke or feel like they're weak. So yeah, we definitely, I see that all the time, and it's not normal. It's not the way you should have to live your life.
So then if somebody's listening to this and they say, "Oh yes, I do have extremely painful periods and it affects my life and it changes my mood at certain points," what would your advice be to those people? Is it that they should, because if you're listening to this and you can't come to somebody like you or I would say that 99.9% of the time that somebody goes to a doctor and says that, they're either going to give them birth control or an SSRI. That's probably fair. What would be your suggestion? Is that good, or is there something we should be doing instead of? Like, what are your thoughts?
Let's assume that everything is normal in the sense that there's nothing horrible like endometriosis or cancer or something weird like that. Usually, what I say with pain and heavy bleeding and stuff like that is that it's probably a huge release of prostaglandins. Prostaglandins cause, we use them to induce labor, so the pain can be pretty severe. Dilates blood vessels, so you have heavier bleeding. Can make you feel like you have the flu, muscle aches and pains, diarrhea, headache. It's horrible. And usually, if women, in my experience, even add magnesium, high doses of fish oil, because fish oil will move you from, there's a prostaglandin cascade. One arm is really painful, the other arm usually is more relaxing to the uterus. Fish oil will move you to the relaxing side. I use a lot of maca in my practice. Those three things, if you can't start progesterone because you don't have it, progesterone will thin out the lining so you have less prostaglandin release because you have less lining. Those four things, if you can use all four of those, 75% of that goes away within 2 or 3 months just doing that. You can even get progesterone now over the counter in like 20 milligram doses that you can buy on Amazon. Not a huge fan of doing that, but it's out there. But yeah, maca, magnesium, and fish oil, 2 to 4 grams a day, can make a huge difference.
Okay, well, that's very helpful. What about irregular bleeding? So some women will say, I maybe have a period every 75 days, and that's really annoying because I don't know when I'm going to bleed. But the even worse part is some people will say, I bleed every 14 days or I bleed every 18 days, and I never know when I'm going to bleed. What are some of the causes of that, or what are some of the things you would recommend if somebody is having those issues that is not birth control?
Usually, depending on age, but if it's a young girl, it's like 14 to 18. It might just be that their hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis just hasn't matured yet. So we can throw a lot of stuff at them, but it might just be they need to give it a couple of years. And if it's not necessarily interfering with their life, then I don't necessarily get too involved with them. They just need to have that maturation process. Women in their 20s, 30s, 40s, you could have PCOS. So we want to look into that because that's probably the number one thing we think of with an irregular period. But you also want to look at, obesity can affect that. We talked about gut health and the inflammatory process, the inflammation load in the body. And we throw around the word inflammation all the time without really talking about what it is. But I think that comes down to lifestyle, food, sleep. We talked about cortisol in high levels because of stress. And, you can say, oh, you're stressed, but what does that mean to a person? It's like, well, you need to calm down. Okay, well, that's another thing you should never probably say to a woman. But I think it's, what I think a lot of the problems with cycling, if everything is fairly normal, is probably lifestyle related. I think we live in a very stressful world and we live in a society where we're on the phones all the time, we're not outside. Some women might exercise almost too much because of body image things that can mess up your cycle. I've had women in my practice where I have diagnosed that their cortisol is really high on like a Dutch test. And I've had to tell them to not exercise as much for a few months. And then they are stressed out because they're worried about weight gain. But if they slow down and they do some relaxation or just walk, I've seen 7 to 10 pound weight loss just from actually dialing it back a little bit. So it really depends on, and that's the other thing we don't do a lot of in our society as physicians is we don't ask those lifestyle questions really, because as we talked about, doctors may not have the time to do that. But if you really just, the first question I ask new patients is, tell me your story. Like what's your journey so far? What have you done? What are your symptoms? And kind of where would you like to go? What's your perfect day kind of a thing? And most people, if you listen, will kind of give you hints as to what's going on.
Yeah. So a lot of it then could be stress. It could be, but I mean, it could also be endometriosis, things like that. But I would say that stress is probably a good answer for a lot of people with the life that we live. What about though if you're listening to this and you've gone through menopause, so you're on the other side of menopause and maybe you're on hormones. Obviously if you're not on hormones and you've gone through menopause and you're bleeding, that's a big red flag and you need to see somebody for that. You need an ultrasound, lots of things. Wonder if you're someone who has gone through menopause, now you're on hormones, now you're having issues with bleeding. Talk about that a little bit.
So we're always taught in residency, anybody with postmenopausal bleeding has cancer until proven otherwise, right? So whenever if I just start someone on hormones and they have spotting, I don't get too worried. I usually will give it a month or two because we're cranking the engines back up and that can stimulate the lining, can stimulate the uterus. So a little cramping, a little spotting is pretty common. If I have a woman that calls me, and it also depends on age, if they're right around 48 to 52-ish, I don't get like super worried. But, if I have a lady that's 72 and she's been on hormones for 6 months and she calls me with spotting, I'll probably get an ultrasound because we want to look at the lining of the uterus. Is it too thick? You could also have bleeding if it's too thin. If it's too thin and they're bleeding, I probably will adjust their hormones. If the lining is a little thickened, we want to do that extra step of an endometrial biopsy just to make sure there isn't a polyp or something. I pick up fibroids all the time. They can definitely cause spotting because the hormone replacement could stimulate the fibroid as well. So yeah, the ultrasound is pretty important. An endometrial biopsy, there's a lot of horror stories on the internet about how painful they are and how we don't anesthetize women. But if it's done the right way, most of the time it's uncomfortable, but it shouldn't be like the worst thing you've ever experienced in your life, and it can rule out cancer for sure. So yeah, I think an ultrasound and then a biopsy. But most of the time, I can tell you, I've been in practice for 25 years, and I've maybe seen 2 cases of endometrial cancer that I've picked up on a biopsy. It's a pretty rare disease process, usually in conjunction with diabetes, obesity. There's a family history, things like that. But usually, if a woman's on hormones, I have to go through those steps to cover myself and to make sure there isn't something there. But most of the time, it's just the hormones maybe aren't, the estrogen and progesterone particularly aren't quite balanced yet.
Yeah, I would agree. So I think that's important because, yes, a lot of people will read on the internet, like, oh, if you're bleeding and you've gone through menopause, you have cancer. And so then people lose their mind. And then that kind of spirals and segues into the whole, oh my gosh, hormones cause cancer, which is not true. So you mentioned that, your grandma just didn't take hormones, and part of the reason that you ended up in gynecology was, or OBGYN, was wanting to kind of be able to help somebody like your mom in the future. So you mentioned that she had cancer, but then after she was diagnosed, they wouldn't give her hormones, so she was pretty miserable at the end of her life. So let's talk about that. I think that conversation is starting to change for the better slowly. And people like you and I, yes, in mainstream OBGYN endocrinology primary care, it's probably going to take another 10 years, unfortunately. But, I bring people on and talk about this all the time. Does hormones cause cancer?
And we know this. But the Women's Health Initiative not only damaged an entire generation of women, I think it really hurt an entire generation of physicians. Even the younger physicians are still afraid of it because they learned from my generation. And so they still think it causes cancer. The big study in the summer of 10 million women that were on estrogen had lower rates of breast cancer, lower rates of lung and colon cancer, and they had less dementia. And actually, the crappy Women's Health Initiative, the estrogen only arm in that study did not have an increased risk of cancer. And nobody ever talks about that. It was the combination of Premarin and Provera, which who uses those anymore, anyways. I have seen a couple patients on Premarin in the last week, but it's pretty rare. So it's just scared everybody senseless. And I can't tell you how many times I've had a patient come in the last year or two who's feeling great on her hormones, and she's in a walking group and she's walking with her girlfriends, and one of them will say, "Oh, you can't be on hormones. They're going to cause cancer." And then she stops everything, and then she calls me, and I have to have that discussion with her all over again. So it's still pretty prevalent
Or they are in a doctor's visit with their primary care doctor and
all the
they say,
time.
Dr. Cassie or Dr. Shawn put me on this hormone, and their doctor tells them how they're going to get cancer and how we're trying to kill them. And those are the people that really infuriate me. But I completely agree with that. I actually have seen several people recently on Premarin too. So I'm like, what is going on here? Like,
And it's young doctors. It's not, I always ask, how old is your doctor? Because I would expect them to be 65 or 70, and no, they're younger doctors
so I
prescribing
don't
it.
know where that is coming from, but yeah, I wouldn't recommend Premarin. Um, yeah, so and I agree with you. I think that there's this whole generation of women, unfortunately, who had a huge disservice done to them over the last 25 years. These are the women that are going to be demented and breaking their bones and, have heart disease. And unfortunately, if you were somebody kind of going through menopause around 2000 and you're just now kind of coming up for air, you've missed a pretty big window of opportunity. Now, not to say that you can't do hormones now. I would happily put you on hormones now, but unfortunately, a lot of times the damage has been done. And so I don't know, like, what do you think the answer is? How do we like break this stigma and get people to understand that hormones done correctly in the right doses don't hurt people? Like, what do we do?
Women change the medical. it's a joke I have, but Niels Bohr said that science evolves one funeral at a time, meaning as the old guard dies off, things change. What used to be crazy stupidity 10 years ago is now the norm. Like Ignaz Semmelweis discovered if you washed your hands after you delivered a baby or did an autopsy and then went and did a delivery, your patient wouldn't die. And he was laughed out of medical science and lost his license. Well, he was right. And it's kind of similar, I think, as women are searching, I just saw a post today from a very well-known traditional gynecologist, and she's saying that NAMS, who unfortunately trains a lot of doctors, says that testosterone therapy adds absolutely no benefit to women's health. It doesn't protect bones. It doesn't help women feel better. And I was reading it and I'm like, well, nobody told me that because I see it all the time. I've seen osteoporosis reversed. Um, and 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 they stick to it like it's almost like they're so staunch about it that they foam at the mouth, and I really don't understand that mindset. So that's not going to change until those people go out of practice because you somehow we need to get to the younger docs that are just coming up in the ranks, and I think women are going to do that by asking questions and saying, I want this, and if you're not going to give it to me, I'm going to go somewhere else. Because if you doctors hate to lose patients. We all take it personally when people leave because we feel like we're not doing something right. And if they start seeing, hey, this lady's going to him and this lady's going to him, then they might start going like me when we were talking on your on my podcast about the GI map. Not something that I routinely offer, but listening to you talk about it, and I have patients ask about it all the time. I'm kind of that mindset. I want to learn more about it because I want to know. And I think the younger docs will start doing that as women start transitioning their mindset as well.
Well, I hope so. And my other hope is that, there are more and more female doctors now. And so I'm hoping that as female doctors get to that age where they're going to start becoming perimenopausal and menopausal, that they're going to demand better for their health. And sometimes, unfortunately, it takes you being the patient and having a bad experience from a health perspective for you to really want to do better for your patients. But to your point, I have thousands of women I've treated with testosterone, and all of them get better bones. And they do feel astronomically better. They have better energy. It actually does help your gut. It helps you love and tolerate your husbands more. I mean, there's so many, it helps your brain, blood flow to your brain, right? So the fact that NAM says that and whoever is toting this is very, it is disheartening. And I hate that some platforms on Instagram, there was a podcast and somebody that I really, really like and enjoy, but they had a doctor on who just ripped hormones. And this was a big podcast. Millions of women listen to this. Ripped hormones, talked about how bad they were, yada, yada. They want to quote all these, the National Menopause Society. And it's just really disheartening, but also very hurtful for women because then I have people coming to me like, well, this person on this podcast said that. Okay, well, I don't care. Like, what are their credentials? How many people does that person treat? Like, there's a lot of people who stand up there and say, oh, let's do this, this, and this because I researched it. Well, there's a big difference between research and clinical practice. And I know this because I did it in fellowship, and you know this, like we're out on the front lines talking to people every day. There is no better, in my opinion, way to learn about people and research what is good for people than by taking care of them every single day,
And
right?
the
Because
same thing goes for the Hubermans out there that spout off all this stuff. They don't see patients either, but they sell a lot of supplements. It goes both ways, right? There's so much misinformation from people that don't actually see people. It's like, okay, well, either way, whether it's a supplement junkie pushing stuff or if it's a physician who's pushing their narrative and they don't see people anymore because they wrote a book 10 years ago and they made millions and they didn't need to see people anymore. But I think what I always say is Some people out there are trying to be relevant in a noisy space. I mean, the hormone space is really noisy. And in order to seem relevant or to seem like you know something that nobody else knows, you cherry pick data. You cherry pick one study that had 12 people in it, or you misconstrue the data, and you make it this revolutionary thing. Like what's funny about the Women's Health Initiative, the results that they found were already in the package insert. We knew that. We knew the results because it was already in there. So, but when they came out of it, they glommed onto that 1 in 1,000 risk. Even the breast cancer risk was only 1 in 1,000 higher than the general population, but they made it seem like it was this enormous thing, or the DVT risk. I'm still trying to get women to not be afraid of oral estrogen. I mean, oral estradiol. Granted, it wouldn't be my first choice, but it's not. It's a 1 in 1,500 risk of DVT. It's not the end of the world. It's there's probably a higher risk taking Tylenol if you take it for long enough. But we just glom onto these little tidbits, medical medium, whatever, and that's doctrine now. And unfortunately, the higher number of followers you have, the more it means you're an expert somehow.
Yeah, the
And
more credibility you get.
then what happens too is, there are a lot of people out there talking about it, specifically the ladies with the menopausal group. And what happens is when you start to hit like 1 million or 2 million followers, for some reason, I hope I wouldn't do this, but they start going the way of monetary gain and supplements and endorsements and stuff, and they kind of lose the message a little bit. And while they're doing good things, I think it gets confusing for patients.
No, I agree. And also the other thing that is confusing is, and I just learned this, like I'm a complete idiot when it comes to things like this, but I didn't even know you can buy Instagram followers. So like some of these people that have all these followers allegedly and have all this credibility, and I'm trying to look up their credibility, and there are people out there who call themselves doctors, and I'm not sure what they're a doctor of. They don't necessarily have all the credibility that you think they do because they've bought their followers and they're a doctor of, I don't even know. What are they?
My favorite one
Dietitian,
is a
naturopathic? I
prominent
don't know.
prominent guy out there who talks about gut, thyroid, and everything, and he's a doctor, so and so, but he's a doctor of pastoral sciences.
What is that?
It's you can buy it. I think it means you're a doctor of divinity or something. And it's like, but he's now in the health space. But they use. I always tell my followers, if someone's a doctor, if it takes you more than a minute to figure out what kind of a doctor they are, there's a reason they're hiding that. Because people like you and me, I'll just put MD on my title so people know what I am. I don't usually say I'm Dr. Shawn Tassone. I'll say MD. But if you have to dive and it takes you 14 pages on their bio to figure out that they're a doctor of chiropractic or something. Why are they hiding that? And that's something you need to look at too, is what are they a doctor of, like you just said?
Well, or just Google them, because like if you put you or I in Google, the first thing that's going to come up is that, our MPI number, like all sorts of stuff you can Google about people, right? But no, I completely agree, and it is frustrating because it's difficult for patient, like it's the patients that kill me, right? It's like they're in a difficult spot. But I am hopeful that people like you and I and people that spread the correct word are going to change that trajectory, because I personally have seen hormones change the lives of thousands of people. It is like I love it so much in my practice. I have this new love for gut, but like when you put those things together, I mean, you can really change people's lives. And the fact that people get on social media and make a bunch of stupid ass remarks about how hormones cause cancer or whatever you said, because they're getting paid to do it, or because they know one person that took one thing and had one side effect. Like, of course, are hormones for every single human listening to this? No. Do some people have problems with hormones? Yes. At our practice, we really try to figure out why. If you're having issues with hormones, let's look at your gut. Let's do Dutch testing. Like, let's figure out, it's because your hormones are supposed to come and go. Are we not metabolizing them correctly? Like, but they are so beneficial. And so it's just really frustrating when you all encompass something like that. Like, I try really hard not to do that. So I completely agree with you. And I'm going to start telling people that if you are trying to find someone's credentials and they call themselves a doctor, if you can't Google them and within 30 seconds figure out what they're a doctor of,
Yeah, and there I will tell you, people always rag on big pharmacy because it's an easy target. Oh, you're paid. How many? I always get this whenever somebody's arguing with me on the internet. How many how many vaccines did you get? It's like what the hell does that even have to do with anything? But the big pharma, oh, you're paid by big pharma. That's against the law. We can't get money from big pharma. But if you look at the supplement industry, I think it made 3 times the amount big pharma did last year. And nobody talks about that. It's like these people that are, I mean, I know somebody that's in the thyroid space that probably made $3 million last year and selling supplements and programs and is a doctor of clinical nutrition, but the school that this person got their degree from has closed because it was shut down because it wasn't legitimate, but they're still a doctor. And they've been on like Good Morning America. And it's like, and then you and I are just out here grinding trying to trying to help people and it's just it's the internet is a fascinating space. I mean, it's fascinating.
Well, and we have something to lose if we do something incorrectly, right? Like that's the other thing that's frustrating. If I say something on social media, people are like, "Oh, you're a doctor. I can take that as medical advice." But some of these doctors that aren't doctors can say whatever the hell they want and do whatever they want because they don't have anything to lose. They have a fake doctor license, or they're a doctor of pastoral science or of philosophy or whatever. And so it is, I mean, it is true. I almost wish that Instagram, Meta, like if you're listening to this, you should have like a special way that people are verified, and you shouldn't allow them to call themselves doctor unless they're a real medical doctor, in my opinion. But that's just me. And so we'll go back to not talking about that. So, anyways, I think this is all very helpful information and very interesting. I want to ask you a couple of questions I ask everyone. This is not medicine related, and I want you to tell me the first thing that comes to mind. Like, don't overthink this. But what
My
is
brain is a scary place, so okay, we'll try.
first words? What is one food that's most beneficial and why?
Food.
Food.
Lord have mercy. Is the first thing that popped into my head is just meat, beef. I know that vegans or vegetarians might have a problem with that. I just think that because most women don't get enough protein. I think clean protein sources, meat, chicken, fish, we probably underconsume because I'm definitely not a cholesterol weirdo. I do think that cholesterol matters, but I also think, eating a diet with good protein sources, eggs and stuff like that is super important, especially for women.
I like it. Protein. What is one thing that anyone listening to this podcast right now can do that will improve their health that's 100% free?
Sleep.
I agree.
Easier said than done. I don't sleep, but sleep.
Why don't you sleep?
I don't know. It's really weird. I used to sleep great, and then I got divorced 7, 8 years ago, and I don't sleep. I didn't sleep for a long time. Now that my fiance moved out here to Austin in July, I actually sleep a lot better. I don't know if it was some weird trigger for me being alone, but I couldn't fall asleep, and it was
Wow.
stressful.
There's great things for that, by the way, if that ever happens again. There's a peptide called DSIP that helps you get into deep sleep. I love it. I use it when I'm stressed. It works like a charm. So there's
Is it
some
an
things.
injectable or is it pill
It's
or?
injectable, but the cool thing is you can take it and not take it, but it just induces delta wave sleep. So it takes you from alpha, beta into delta. And it's thought that like your subconscious stops that when you're stressed, right? So you get into that like light sleep, but you don't really fall asleep. So it just induces delta wave
How
sleep.
quick does it work? Is it pretty quick?
So I mean, when you're tired, it works within 10 minutes. If you're really like rolling, like 2 nights ago, I did a podcast until like 11 o'clock because I was doing it with somebody in Saudi Arabia. And I go downstairs and I've been under these lights and I'm like, but I was so tired. It took about 35 minutes, but I mean, it works. It's pretty interesting. And like you go to sleep and you do not wake up because, these things, trazodone and
Oh
clonazepam and
God, yeah.
those
Can't get
things,
up.
Ambien, they cause dementia. Like, and people just write them like candy. And some people tell me like none of this causes dementia. Baloney, like they cause dementia.
I
Like
took I took Ambien one time and I woke up in the corner of my bedroom and I didn't know why I was standing there. And I was like, I'm not taking this ever again. What the heck am I doing in the corner of the bed? I mean, I was sleepwalking, obviously, and I've heard people that do that, but I don't even prescribe Ambien. I can't. I use hops a lot in my practice because it works sometimes for patients.
Yeah, and I like a little bit of melatonin. Also, your gut, like just throwing that out there, there are certain things when your gut is off that will cause you to either not be able to fall asleep or wake up. But DSIP, I like it because it's not something you have to take necessarily every day. So just, anyways, we digress. But my last question is, what is one thing you wish you would have known about your health 30 years ago that you would have done differently knowing what you know now?
This might sound horrible to all the patients whose babies I delivered, but I wish I would have just done GYN a long time ago for my body because I think the stress levels, my blood pressure, my happiness. I didn't do well with being on call all the time. And I think when you're 27 and you decide, oh, I can do this forever. And then when you're 47 and you're like, wow, I mean, it takes 3 days to recover from call. And you're in a big group and you're doing like 12 deliveries. I have found that the joy in my life right now, I'm down 40 pounds. I sleep a lot better now, and having it's okay. I guess what I would say to myself would be, it's okay to be happy. I always felt like I had to suffer through that because this is what I signed up for. And the reality was I needed to figure out for me what makes me happy because I got being in private practice, GYN only, I have like 825 five-star reviews. I never used to get that when I did OB. And I think it's because I was on the inside, I was just miserable. Not because I was not happy with my patients, but the lifestyle was just slowly killing me. And how many of us out there kill ourselves because of our jobs, you know?
I completely agree. No, it's so true. I did 2 years of call at the VA as a internal medicine doctor who admitted people from the ER all night long. And I was only 30, and I bet those 2 years aged me 15. I tell people all the time, I completely commend anyone in the military, and I never served in the military, but I feel like I did for 2 years there. You want to talk about a war zone? It's hard, and it's so hard on your body, right? And it's just, I agree, and it was for me the same thing. Like I told my husband, I feel like I am going to do a disservice to these people if I quit because they don't have anyone else. But like, you have to at some point take care of yourself, because some of the best advice I ever got, I had a patient, oh my gosh, she'll make me cry, sweetest lady, I took care of her forever. She passed away recently, but she was 93. But she told me at her last visit, because she was going to go home and die, she said, Cassie, you just make sure that you always take care of yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself, no one else will. And that was the last thing she said to me. She was the sweetest lady.
And you think about it, you think it's cliche, but I'm 58, and now that I'm older, and my dad's 82, and I look at my dad, and he's never really lived his true self. I think he just kind of went through the motions, that generation, Vietnam and all that stuff, and he never really had the opportunity to figure out what he wanted. What did he was he fulfilled? And I really feel like now in my life, going through divorce, reinventing myself. This is me. This is really kind of where I'm at right now. And I see a full schedule now. I don't dread it. I'm like, wow, these people all want to see me. It's like, wow, that's like, to me, that's amazing. Whereas before I would have been like, dang it, I got like 45 patients today and nobody's going to be happy. And, you project, and it's true, it's kind of woo, but it's like you attract what you put out there to a certain, to extent. So I feel like I'm in a good place.
I love that. So, Dr. Shawn, tell everyone where they can find you, because I'm sure now people are very interested in you. So, where can they find you on social media? We know you're in Austin. Like, tell everyone about you.
Instagram, Shawn Tassone, MD, TAS. It's TAS1. That's how you spell my last name. Not that in high school anyone ever called me Tasshole. Not
Yeah.
that they did that.
We asked one. I like it.
TAS1. And Shawn Tassone, MD. Obviously, I'm there most of the time, but we push everything out to YouTube. I was surprised. There's a lot of women out there. I did a video on women over 65 that do hormones. Probably my biggest video to this date. The demographic on there's a lot of people on YouTube watching stuff, even the 65 to 85-year-olds. And I'm on Facebook, not as much, but I also have my book, The Hormone Balance Bible. You can get that on Amazon. There's a QR code in there. You can take my hormone quiz. It's 36 questions. Everybody's got a quiz. Mine's better. And it'll just kind of give you a starting point as to what hormones might be bothering you.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on and for just helping educate my listeners on all things hormones. We'll have to do it again. I loved it. And then at some point, I'm going to come to Austin and visit you and McCall, and maybe we should all three sit down and just enlighten the world with all of
And
our.
we will eat beef.
Oh yeah, for sure. McCall likes beef too. Let's do it.
I've been to dinner with McCall many times, so we're just missing you. You got to come out here.
Well, let me know. Let me get the next invite. I'm happy to come out.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I hope that you found that episode as enlightening as I did. I always love having somebody on that has the same, thought process as me, and just how patients need to be treated as a holistic entity. And Dr. Tassone he's just an amazing guy. And so if you had any questions about PCOS or bleeding, I hope that or hormones in general, that we helped answer some of those questions. Please remember that Modern Endocrine is licensed in 43 states now. We are so happy to help you with any problems you have, whether they're hormonal related, gut related, thyroid related. We do visits in person in Oklahoma City, but also via telehealth. We have some great gut programs. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it. Share this with anyone that you know. Make sure that you give me a review wherever you get your podcast, whether it be Apple, whether it's on YouTube or Spotify. And then my last ask is that you're following us on social media. I do try to give you really good educational information that is 100% free. So follow us there. Let me know who you want me to interview, what questions you have. And I really appreciate the fact that you spend this time trying to learn and fix your health every week with us. I'll see you guys next week. The information presented, including any materials discussed, referenced, or linked within this podcast, are for general educational purposes only, not the practice of medicine. No doctor-patient relationship is formed from you listening to this podcast or utilizing any of the information provided. I am a doctor, but I am not talking to you as your doctor. The information provided is not intended to diagnose or treat health problems, or take the place of the professional medical care provided by your doctor. If you are experiencing any health problems, including problems you believe have been touched upon in any respect within this podcast, you should consult your doctor about the problems without delay. You may ask your doctor whether he or she believes the information I have provided would be helpful to you, but you should still consult your doctor immediately and follow his or her medical advice as your treating physician. I'm just here to provide you basic knowledge about the issues we discuss so you are more aware of them and can better discuss them with your doctor. That's why we call it Back to the Basics. Join me on the next episode as we continue our journey.